Hey calculus, we are going to practice the product rule. The first thing to do is to make sure you recognize when you need the product rule. One hint is that there will be two x's. Okay, here we have an x and an x. Chances are that means that you have two separate functions and you are multiplying them together. So here is your first function, x to the fourth. Here is your second function, sine of x. So the product rule is the first function times the derivative of the second plus the second function times the derivative of the first function. So it looks like this. Our first function, as is x to the fourth. The derivative of the second function, the derivative of the sine, is the cosine. All right, so if it helps, label your parts. This is 1, this is d2. And we have plus the second function, as is the sine of x. And the derivative of the first function, x to the fourth, using the power rule, is 4x to the third. So this is the second function as is, and this is the derivative of the first. All right. We want to make sure that we get the coefficients to the front of each term. So there is nothing to change, the first term. So we just simplify that, x to the fourth times the cosine of x. But the second term, hey, that 4 we want to get to the front of the term. So I'm just going to put 4x to the third in front. All right, so that's the first thing you want to do, is simplify each term. Now, we want to think of this as one big binomial, this term plus this term, and now we want to factor. What's common to each of those terms? Well, I can pull out x to the third because there's 4x's here and there's 3x's here. You always pull out the smallest power of x that you have. So I'm going to put x to the third out front, then I'm going to rewrite that binomial. All right, to get this term, I simply take my first term and I divide it by my common factor. So x to the fourth divided by x to the third gives me x, and then of course I still have the cosine of x there. All right, if I divide the second term by my common factors, the x to the thirds are going to cancel out. I still have a 4, and I still have a sine of x. 4 sine of x. So there is your final best factored answer. There you go, the product rule. Okay, number 2, again, this needs a product rule because there's two separate functions multiplied together. So our first function is x to the negative 6.3. Our second function is ln 4x. For the first function, when we take the derivative of the first function, that's going to be a power rule. When it comes time to take the derivative of the second function, that's a composite function because you have two functions here, the natural log of 4x. That's going to be a chain rule. All right, so let's go to work. We're going to set up the product rule. So the first function as is x to the negative 6.3. The derivative of the second function is going to be a chain rule. So the derivative of the outer, ln, is 1 over something. The inner as is 4x. And the derivative of the inner is 4. And I'm going to make everything a fraction. So again, this is the first function, and this is the derivative of the second. All right, we come back with plus, and now we need the second function as is, ln 4x. That is the second function as is, and now we need the derivative of the first function, and that is a power rule. That gives us negative 6.3x to the negative 7.3. All right, to simplify this thing, we're going to simplify each term. So right here, I'm going to put this over 1, and just to make it a little bit easier to simplify, if I multiply across the top, I'm going to have x to the negative 6.3. If I multiply across the bottom, I just have that x. If you notice, these 4's are going to cancel right here. So I'm left with x to the negative 6.3 on top over x. Alrighty, if I simplify this term right here, I'm just going to put the number out front. So negative 6.5 x to the negative 7.3, and then ln 4x. All right, right here, if I'm dividing two exponents that have the same base, this is x to the first. Remember, I subtract there. All right, so I have x to the negative 6.3 minus 1, so that gives me x to the negative 7.3. All right, and then I bring down my second term as is. I'm going to change this to negative because I have a positive and a negative, so that gives me negative 6.5 x to the negative 7.3 ln 4x. There we go. Now, think of this as one binomial. I have this term minus this term. As you can see, I can factor out an x to the negative 7.3. All right, so when I factor this, I'm going to put that, of course, out front. All right, so it's going to look like this. I put my common factor out front, x to the negative 7.3, and then I rewrite. To get my first term, I just divide this by negative 7.3, and that gives me a 1. To get this term here, I divide the second term by x to the negative 7.3, so I have negative 6.5, and I still have ln 4x. All right, so there is our final best full credit factor answer. Yay, calculus. Number 3, our first function is x to the 8th. Our second function is a composite function, 3x plus 7 to the 9th. To take the derivative of the first, we will need a power rule. To take the derivative of the second function, we will need a chain rule. But we start with the product rule. So y prime, the first function as is x to the 8th. The derivative of the second function, the derivative of the outer is 9 times something to the 8th. The inner as is 3x plus 7. The derivative of the inner is 3. Alrighty, so if we label our parts, this right here is the first function as is, and this whole thing here is the derivative of the second, d2. All right, we come back with the plus sign. Now we need the second function as is, 3x plus 7 to the 9th. So there's 2 as is, and now we need the derivative of the first, and that is just a power rule, 8x to the 7th. Alrighty, so there is the calculus portion of the problem, setting up the product rule, 1d2 plus 2d1. Now we're going to simplify each term. All right, so if we simplify this term right here, hey, I can multiply the 9 and the 3 and put that out front. All right, so I have 27, I still have x to the 8th, and I still have 3x plus 7 to the 8th. All right, if I simplify this term right here, I'm just going to put this 8 out front. So I'm going to write it as 8x to the 7th times 3x plus 7 to the 9th. All right, now I can factor. All right, the next step is to factor. Remember, think of this as one big binomial. All right, you've got this term plus this term. What's common to each term? Well, there's no common factor of 27 and 8, but I have 8x's here and 7x's here. So I can pull out x to the 7th. You always pull out the smallest power of x that you have. Now look at the 3x plus 7s. I have 8 here, I have 9 here. The smallest power is 8. So I can pull out front 8, 3x plus 7. So 3x plus 7 to the 8th. Now I'm going to rewrite the binomial. All right? So to get my first term, I take the first term up here and I divide it by the common factors. I have a 27 that's going to come down. X to the 8th divided by x to the 7th gives me x to the 1st. And if you look at my 3x plus 7s to the 8s are going to cancel out. To get this term, I simply divide the second term by the common factors. So the 8 is going to come down. X to the 7th divided by x to the 7th is going to give me cancel out. So those are going to cancel. And then the 3x plus 7, I have 9 here and I have 8 here. So I have 1 left. 3x plus 7. All right? So the last thing to do now is just to simplify in here. So if you distribute here, that gives you 24x plus 56. So now common factors come down. They are part of the answer until the very end. So x to the 7th and 3x plus 7 to the 8th. Now inside here we add like terms. As you can see, we have 27x's here and 24x's here. So that gives us 51x's. Oops, I don't need a highlighter there, excuse me. So 51x, and then of course I still have a 56 there. So plus 56. And there is my final best simplified factored product rule answer. Number 4. Our first function is e to the 5x. Our second function is the cosine of 2x. Those will both be chain rules when it comes time to take the derivative of them. So f prime of x, the first function as is e to the 5x. So that's 1. The derivative of the second. The derivative of the outer is negative sine. The inner as is 2x. And never forget about the derivative of the inner times 2. So that whole thing is the derivative of the second function. Now we come back with plus. We need the second function as is, cosine of 2x. So that is the second function as is. And then the derivative of the first function is also a chain rule. The derivative of the outer is e to something. The inner as is 5x. And the derivative of the inner is 5. So there is our D1. All right, now let's clean up each term right here. I want to get the negative and the 2 out front. So that gives me negative 2e to the 5x and then sine of 2x. Just clean up each term. To the right of the plus sign, the 5 needs to get out front. So 5e to the 5x cosine of 2x. All right, there's our binomial. We have this term plus this term. Is there anything we can factor out? What's common to each side? Well, I can factor out right here in e to the 5x. So let's put that out front. E to the 5x. Now I just simply divide each term by that common factor. If I divide this term by e to the 5x, I'm left with negative 2 sine of 2x. And then if I divide the second term by my common factors, I'm left with 5 cosine of 2x. And there's your final best factored answer. Okay, number 5. Our first function is a composite function. 7x minus 3 to the 9th. That will be a chain rule when it comes time to take the derivative. And our second function is 6x minus 1 to the 5th. And that will also be a chain rule. All right, so to take the derivative, we set up the product rule. The first function as is, 7x minus 3 to the 9th. The derivative of the second, using the chain rule, the derivative of the outer is 5 times something to the 4th. The inner as is 6x minus 1, and don't forget the derivative of the inner is times 6. So if you're labeling your parts, this is 1. This right here is D2, the derivative of the second. Now we have plus in the middle. We come back with the second function as is, so 6x minus 1 to the 5th. And now we take the derivative of the first function. So the derivative of the outer is 9 times something to the 8th. The inner as is is 7x minus 3, and the derivative of the inner, don't forget, is times 7. So this piece right here is the second function as is, and this piece right here is the derivative of the first. All right, so now we're going to clean up each term. So we have to get the numbers to the front. We've got a 5 times a 6, so that gives us a 30 out front. We still have 7x minus 3 to the 9th. We still have 6x minus 1 to the 4th. So we're just cleaning up each side of the product rule. On the right side, we have to multiply the 9 and the 7 and put that out front, 63. I still have 6x minus 1 to the 5th. And I still have 7x minus 3 to the 8th. Okay, so there is our answer so far. Remember, it's one big binomial. This term plus this term. Okay, so now we're going to factor what's common to each of those big, long terms. Well, 30 and 63, I can pull out a 3 out front. All right, 7x minus 3's. All right, I'm going to highlight them, you guys. There are 9 of them on this side. There are 8 of them on this side. So the smallest power of x that we have is 8. So I can pull out 7x minus 3 to the 8th. All right, now next I have 6x minus 1's on each side. I have 4 over here, and I have 5 over here. So I can pull out a 4, the smallest power that I have. So 6x minus 1 to the 4th. Now I'm going to rewrite that big binomial. All right, so to get this term, I divide this first term by my common factors. So 30 divided by 3 gives me a 10 out front. All right, these are going to cancel. The 6x minus 4's, and I have 7x minus 3 left. I have 9 here and 8 here, so I have 7x minus 3. 7x minus 3. All right, remember now, if I distribute this to this, I'm going to end up back up here, kind of how you can check your work. To get the second term, I take my second term here, and I divide it by my common factors. So 63 divided by 3 is going to give me a 21. Alrighty, and then the 7x minus 3's. There's 8 here and there's 8 here. They cancel. The 6x minus 1's. I have 5 here and I have 4 here. So I have 1 left. 6x minus 1. Alrighty? So now the last thing to do is simplify up here. Remember, the common factors are part of the answer all the way to the end. Bring them along. All 3 of them in this case. All right? Now, if I distribute here, this gives me 70x minus 30, and then I keep going. This gives me 21x minus 21. Now I add like terms up there. So I have 70x and 21x. That gives me a 91x down here for my final simplified answer. And then I have a negative 30 and a negative 21. And that gives me a negative 51. All right? So there's a lot of steps there for this problem, but this is your final best full credit factored answer. All right, that's page 1.